Hello there, thank you for staying with us and welcome to another edition of Channels Beam. I'm Victor Matthias. Now, according to Nairametrics, startups operating across several sectors in Nigeria raised an estimated $248.6 million, an equivalent of 102.77 billion naira. That's funding in the third quarter of 2021 alone. Overall, the industry saw investments in all sectors ranging from edtech to agri-tech and even health tech as well. And as events are already kicking off this year, more tech startups are springing up with solutions. The question, however, is how well funded are they to provide solutions to the problems they are trying to solve, and what should they be doing to attract investors? Now, these are questions we will be finding answers to today on the program. But before we get into that, let's take a look at what made the trends on the social media in the past week.
Celebrated annually on February 14th, this year is no different as troops took to their handles to crack jokes, appreciate loved ones and celebrate love. It originated as a Christian feast day honoring one or two early Christian martyrs, and through later folk traditions has become a significant cultural, religious and commercial celebration of romance and love in many regions of the world. Football fans the world over decried the double standards global brands have displayed after they cancelled sponsorship deals with West Ham and Kurt Zuma, citing cases where white players have done worse than him in the past and got away with it. Zuma was seen kicking and dropping his cat in a video, an action that cost him his 2-week wage and a lot of backlash from different quarters.
Well, there you go. Those were some of the trends in the past week. But joining us now to look at today's topic, we have Shola. He is a leadership and development consultant with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development in San Francisco. He works with funding organizations like Working Solutions and Pacific Community Ventures in California. It's a pleasure to have you join us today in the studio, Shola.
Thank you.
Of course. We also have joining us via Zoom, Wande Adalemo. He is a serial entrepreneur, an ICT expert. He is also a director at Founders Institute. Wande, it's a pleasure to have you as well join us today on the program. You seem a little bit distracted. Wande, again, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Of course, you're welcome. So, but shall I kickstart this conversation for us? I mean, just, in 3 quarters, Nigerian startups raised about, $248 million. But it's a new year. Things are happening, tech startups are everywhere trying to, survive. I mean, what do you think they should be doing to attract, those investors?
Well, I think the first thing is to take a step back and look at the investment you talked about. Last year, 2021, about $4 billion was invested in Africa, just all of Africa. About a quarter of that, 25%, was invested in Nigeria. About, I want to say maybe 88% of that went to 5 companies. 5 companies. And those are institutional investments, foreign investments. There's not a lot of investment local Nigerian-based private or institutional investments. So there's not a lot of access to capital as it is today. Locally, right now. So I'm a founder of OIA, which is Open Innovation Access.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we've seen this problem exist for a while. We see many foreign investors coming to Africa, coming to Nigeria, trying to pour in money. The problem is, how do people access this money? How do people access these funds? They're institutional-based funding, but not everyone can access that. So what we see is, a way to help startups go further faster by bridging that gap. See, one of the problems that we also see is that there's not a lot of appetite for investment. Investors in Africa or in Nigeria right now see a lot of risk. The truth is there's a lot of risk in investing in ideas, Nigerian-based ideas. Number one problem is 68% of Nigerian income, average Nigerian income, goes towards food. So, which means food competes with any innovative ideas, first of all. So where's the flexibility for anyone to even sit down and try to innovate? So there's not a lot of flexibility there. And now the second part of it is, there's not a lot of disposable income to even buy the next shiny app or the next product that anyone invests, right?
You're talking about locally now.
Locally right now. Okay. So there's not a lot of that. So there's a whole lot of risk that exists, that deters, local investors or institutional investors to invest and make capital available to people. Most of the investments that we've seen, about $1 billion last year, all came from Asia, Europe, and some from North America. So there's not a lot. So what we try to do is to provide the seed funding. We try to provide the seed funding to get people away from being distracted by working for money. Focus on your innovative idea. By the time we provide that, we provide the guidance, we provide the resources, we provide the mentoring, and then access to capital. Then we bridge the gap, giving investors some comfort of recouping that investment. Really just lowering, in a way, the risk that they see. Once that risk is lowered in their minds, then they're more open to investing. And, the more being open to investing means more access to capital, So that's one of the things that we're trying to do, and we're bridging that gap.
All right, let me quickly bring Wande into this conversation. Wande, I mean, locally now, the whole, the system, like, he just talked about, there is some plugs here and there that, is perhaps responsible for for why we do not see local funding. Like you said, most of the funding that came into the Nigerian tech ecosystem, came from, Asia, Europe, and North America. I mean, what's going on locally?
Right, so there is a lot of money available locally. And like he said, Shola said, trapped in institutions, Bank of Industry, the central bank, and there are a lot of policies around ensuring that entrepreneurs gain access to this funding. However, policy is one thing, right? The other part of this whole thing is that there is the law, the legislation, the regulation that allows entrepreneurs and startups to access this funding easily. And that is one of the things that the startup bill that has been sponsored by people like Ventures Platform will do. It will enable the startups to access this locked up funding in the institutional banks. I got a mail earlier this morning from the Office of the Minister of Digital Economy asking for startups to meet up with him for a breakfast meeting. And one of the key agenda for that meeting is how to unlock opportunities and funding for startups. So without the right legislation in place, without the right incentive for investors, and like Shola correctly said, there's a problem because people look at risk and risk and risk, right? So without the right incentives and regulation in place, investors will shy away from doing things locally. But once the right legislation is in place, the right infrastructure, funding infrastructure is put in place, what will happen is that institutions like the Bank of Industry, policies like the Graduate Empowerment Program by the CBN and the Bank of Industry, policies like the 100 for 100 policies will now begin to go to startups. Because by nature, startups are different from SMEs. So if I want to bring tomatoes into the country and I go to a bank as an example, and I show my historical record, can offer me a loan, and then as I upsell the tomato, back my loan. Startups are completely different. It's an idea that may take off or may not take off. There is the end of the day or not. So there must be laws that protect the amount of money that goes into the creation of that value. And if that value is no longer created, what happens? Is there a bankruptcy process? Is there a pivoting process in place that allows us to say, okay, if this idea is not working, can we do a winding down process for the startup? Without those laws in place, we will still rely on investments from Asia, from Europe, and then North America. Another thing is that
Sorry,
quite a number of our startups.
wanted to budding. Sorry to budding one day. You know, so I'm even particularly interested in because as it is, most of all of this investments that are coming from all of these places, you know, they're not coming from the governments of those countries. They're perhaps coming from maybe, you know, private persons and maybe, you know, consortiums thereabouts. Why don't we have such here? Why don't we have, you know, private individuals, angel investors, as they are usually called? Why don't we have that here? You know, why don't we have people like that here investing in startups? Or are there that I'm not aware of?
We actually do have the Lagos Angel Networks. We have the African Business Angel Networks as well, a group of angel investors who invest in startups at the seed stage, at the sometimes at the pre-seed stage. The challenge that they had earlier on was that a lot of them got their fingers burnt. So startups took money and then they got out of the country. They took money and then their lifestyle changed and the startup stopped growing, but the lifestyle of the startup and the founders started changing. So what is happening with and then we don't have enough of them, and that's the truth. And they don't have the kinds of pockets that their counterparts in North America or Asia or Europe had. So what is happening right now is that accelerators and incubators are beginning to now crowdfund this money from angel investors and show them startups that are ready for investment, the founders are fit for investment, the ideas can begin to generate revenue. Some of the ideas that, as an example, at my own accelerator that I'm a director at, in the last 3 years, we have been able to help our founders raise over ₦1 billion, and the total valuation of just about 6 of them is about 13 billion naira, because they've gone through a process that the angel investors can now trust. But we don't have enough of them, although they exist and they are the pre-seed. Now, even if you have 1,000 pre-seed companies who have been funded, maybe only about 20 to 30% of them will make it to seed and then Series A. So there's a lot of activity going on in the pre-seed stage, but we don't see them survive and grow to become ready for seed funding or pre-seed funding. So we don't have the angel investors. They're not enough. They don't have the kind of deep pockets that their counterparts have in North America or Asia or Europe, but they're doing their best. Why we talk about government in Nigeria is that we have enormous amounts of investment fund locked up in institutions. And the institutions I've mentioned, Development Bank, the Bank of Industry, CBN. It is important that, hello?
I can hear you, go ahead.
Okay, it is important that they initially do take that risk, follow the law, ensure that our startups are funded. What usually happens is that once the startups, as an example, we have startups who are unicorns in Nigeria now, we begin to see founders of these startups already funding other startups as well. I know one of them, Shola, who is a...
Yeah, so they're spreading their tentacles.
Exactly. So now if a startup becomes successful and exits, then you will have those startup founders now can also become angel investors and then invest in the ecosystem. We don't have enough of them now to make that happen.
Let me hold you there for a bit. Let me come back to Shola in the studio. Shola, so now let's look at positioning. You know, what kind of positioning do you look at, or how should startups position themselves? You know, to be available or to be picked for mentoring. You know, like all of the processes. You know, before they even get that capital. What do you look out for? You know, in a startup before you even make that move?
So for us, our model is very different. I mean, we spend a lot of time facilitating any investment that comes to us. And then and of course, we are seed funding as well. So what we look for is to simplify ideas. We don't look for the shiny, complicated ideas, because that's not the development process for coming up with a car is about 10 years or more. The development process to get to production for aircraft engine or any aircraft that you make is probably another over 10 years. And no investor wants to wait that long to recoup investment. So we look for solutions to everyday problems. That's where we can generate the critical mass that will generate, that will provide the solution to everyday problems that Nigerians are facing that would eventually raise standard of living, that would eventually also cause every Nigerian buying into that product. That encourages our investors, because our investors can see a product that we developed through one of these innovations here on the market. They can see it selling, they can see the investment coming back quicker, and they're ready to invest, to pour more into it. The problems that we've seen so far, and I think a few things that Wande said is, there's been a lot of reliance on government, and I think it's high time. You mentioned a really good point there, that why are all the foreign investment coming from private institutional investment? Because in Nigeria, we've been trained to depend so much on government. It's time to move away from that. Not that the government is not doing much, but we need to move away from that and see how we can help ourselves. The second thing here is that he also mentioned that there's not a lot of deep pockets. Well, that's true, because there are only about 12,000 millionaires, dollar millionaires, according to NDIC Nigeria.
Okay,
right?
so before you go into all of those numbers, yeah, just hold it for a bit. We'll take a quick break, and of course, when we come back, I'll come back to you to get on that. Please stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. Well, we still have with us our panelists right here in the Lagos studio as well as via Zoom. But just before we went on break, Shola in the Lagos studio here was talking about a statistic released by the NDIC where he said there are only about 12,000 dollar millionaires. Shola, I mean, isn't that a good number to fund startups in the country?
It is a good number, but it's not a good number at the same time. It's good to see that we have dollar millionaires here, but not a lot of leeway and patience for these investors to invest their $1 million into an idea. Into an idea that is so risky. Most of the time, there's very little patience, and these investors want to recoup their investment back quick. So how do you do that if you're going to invest in something that's longer term? So there's not a lot of appetite there. 12,000 people over 200 million people, that's a very small fraction. We need more millionaires. We don't just talk about millionaires, but that's not a lot to fund all the ideas, all the great ideas that are locked within Nigeria alone. And then lastly, the other thing that Wande was saying, there's not a lot of facilitation and coaching and mentoring given to some of these startups. If an investor comes and drops $1 million and say, well, invest in this person. This person takes the money. There's not a lot of guidance or facilitation. The person takes that money because there's no guidance. They just take that money and go do something, do whatever with it. But what we try to do is a little different. We provide that facilitation because we're here to protect investments. We're not here, and at the same time, we're here to grow people. Our emphasis is on growth and scalability. So what we do is try to ensure that whatever money is coming through our funnel is well tracked, is well facilitated. The innovators are coming back with results, in milestones. And we can see the progress. Our investors can see the progress as well. And that will give them some comfort to know that their money is being allocated properly. So if you think about, we don't want to go too much into statistics, but just think about Facebook, for instance. If whatever was invested in Facebook at the initial stages was not well spent, that capital allocation could have gone into so many different things that would have never brought Facebook to the level it is at right now. If at that same time that someone invested in Facebook, someone else bought a house in that same year, how much more valuable is that house versus Facebook that's $1 trillion today? So that capital allocation is very important, and then facilitation is also equally more important. You can't just give someone money who has not had a lot of training, who just has an idea and just wants to bring that idea to life. They don't know how to develop business models. They don't know how to plan the allocation of that, the funding. They just start spending on things that they believe is right for their business. And at the end of the day, that money gets depleted. The investor doesn't want to invest anymore because they haven't even recouped anything yet. So our model is very different. I think that's the problem there. Reliance on government is too heavy. There's not a lot of, millionaires that are willing to be flexible and be patient enough for the development of some of these ideas, and there's no facilitation for the startups.
All right, let me, as we wind down, let me go back to Wande again. Wande, so I mean, as we wind down now, after all that has been said, and for those listening, what would you be asking? What would you be telling them, especially, how to position themselves, how to make, I say now, pitch, because you just never might know who you'd meet at the next tea meeting or meetup. So how would you advise that they pitch, their startups, to people who they believe would be able to come in and invest in their ideas?
I think the first thing for entrepreneurs to do is to become part of a network or an ecosystem that can help them refine their ideas. Funding is usually the last thing. And from my experience and interaction with entrepreneurs, it's like putting the cart before the horse when you start talking of funding. Most times, there's no critical thought process for the idea. So the first thing is join an accelerator, be part of an incubator, or organizations like Shola's organization, so let them help you refine the idea. So that when you're talking to an investor, it is an already refined idea that the investor can look at. Last week, Friday, I was in front of an investor and I still pitch. And we're looking for $1 million. An investor was like, he said something about, you're talking from experience, because we've done this again and again and again. So it's easier for you to articulate your thoughts correctly, put your pitch decks together, and then they can see exactly what you've done. Then they should avoid the shortcut mentality. There's no shortcut to building a successful business in Lagos. You have to do the hard work. You have to build your MVP. You have to have traction. And traction is not, I have built my pitch deck. Traction is customers who are willing already to pay, who have said they're willing already to pay. Traction is the amount of work you've done within a space of time, and then you have repeatable paying customers for that idea. There's no investor that would see that and not say, oh, this is a very valuable idea. So funding should be the last thing on your mind. The first thing on your mind is getting the idea right, making it workable, making it presentable to anyone, anywhere in the world, and then solving a real problem. If it's solving a real problem, and Shola mentioned something earlier, that we spend almost 70% of our income in Nigeria on food. That is a huge opportunity in the agro-allied, agro-tech sector. Yeah. It means that there's some opportunity there, because if billions of dollars are going into that direction, then how can I make that easier? How can I make processes better in that direction? If it is easier and better, then there'll be funds free for other parts of life. So find a process, find an ecosystem that helps you refine your idea. Don't have the founder bias. Don't think your idea is the best in the world. Ideas are a dime a dozen. Funding should be the last thing on your mind. In fact, bootstrap for as long as possible. Talk to someone like Shola, join an institute like my own institute, and see how people are helped to now present them before the right kind of investors who would now say, okay, I like this idea, I can now put money behind it. That's my advice to founders.
All right, Beryl, one day, Adalim, I'd have to say thank you for joining us today, of course, and sharing your thoughts on this.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure being here.
Of course, always a pleasure having you as well. Shola, so as we just, your own advice, your parting words, what would you be advising, people who are just starting, to do as they start this journey?
So the first thing is clarifying your idea. Do you know what your idea is about? I usually tell people, if you can't really explain your idea in one sentence, it's too complicated. It's too complicated, because most of the time, the investors that you run into, you might run into an investor in the hallway. They have very little time to hear what you have to say. You don't have a lot of time for speech and to bring out your PowerPoint slides and talk and talk and talk and talk. You need to be able to dumb it down to one sentence and be able to explain it and be able to. So that's one of the things we try to spend time on. So I would advise people, clarify your idea. Ensure that you know what it's about. Second of all is, does it solve a problem, like Wande said? If it does, an idea is only as good as the problem it solves. It doesn't solve any problem, nobody cares. The next shiny app doesn't really, if it doesn't solve a problem, how does it affect me? How does it affect you? How does it help anyone else here? People are interested in things that help them, especially in Nigeria of today. So, third of all, is there a need for it? Sometimes, we have all these ideas, and the ideas are only discretionary, they're only meeting discretionary needs, which means, well, I will buy it when I do feel like buying it. No, we want something that you will buy because you need to buy it. So we need to come to that level where we clarify all of that. It's easier for us to come in front of an investor and say, "Yeah, see, I know you need me because I have something that solves the problem, and this is the people, this is the size of the population of people that are going to be buying into what I have," and that comes into valuation as well. That's the problem that we have. We have an idea right now. Two companies that we're working with in Nigeria right now. One is Chase Crow. One of the things that we've had to do with them is to clarify that idea. How do you just come up with something, spend so much money into developing that app, and expect everybody to buy it? No, we need to be able to come down to what size of the population would even be interested in downloading your app.
Right.
And then the other one is more of, something that helps banks.
Okay.
And we're going to be pitching that later. But at least one of the things that we've done with that is to identify a need. There's a fraudulent problem in Nigeria with fraudulent SMSs coming through.
Yeah.
So we're working with this, innovator to develop something that helps, decipher that. So we'll be able to tell the difference. So identifying that is important.
All right, thank you so much again, for sharing your thoughts as well. Shola Adekanye, you are the founder of Open Innovation Access. Thanks again for joining us on the program.
Thanks so
today.
much.
Well, that's where we are, and hopefully startups would take all of this advice and put it into good use, and of course they would have that launch that would eventually get them to unicorns and will be celebrated globally as well. But that's where we round it up today on the show. Thank you for watching. I'm Victor Matthias. Bye for now.